The desert sun was merciless, pounding the earth with waves of heat that shimmered above the dunes like ghostly mirages. Kareem wiped the sweat from his brow for the 10th time in an hour, but the fine grains of sand clinging to his skin only made it worse. He lowered his wide-brimmed hat, shielding his eyes as he surveyed the endless golden expanse that stretched out before him, an ocean of sand hiding secrets deeper than the sea itself. For as long as Kareem could remember, he had dreamed of this moment, standing on the threshold of what could be the greatest discovery of the century, the lost tomb of Pharaoh Seti-Ra. Legends whispered of the pharaoh's power, his mastery of forbidden rites, and the countless treasures entombed with him to ensure his passage to eternity. But more than gold, Kareem craved truth, the hidden story buried beneath layers of myth and time. He unrolled the ancient scroll once more, its cracked papyrus trembling in the hot breeze. The ink was faded, the symbols sometimes broken, but he knew every glyph by heart. He traced his finger over the final line, where the sun bows to stone, the pharaoh sleeps. Behind him, a voice interrupted his thoughts. You'll wear holes through that thing if you keep staring at it, Kareem. Kareem turned to see Leela, her linen scarf wrapped tightly around her head to guard against the sun. She had the steady patience of a scholar and the sharp tongue of someone who had heard every fool's theory about ancient Egypt. Except Kareem's didn't sound so foolish now. I'm not staring at it, Kareem said, rolling up the scroll. Carefully, I'm listening. Leela raised an eyebrow. She squinted at the horizon, where their excavation camp crouched like a scattering of beetles in the sand. Beyond it, Omar was fussing with equipment, while Thomas sat in the shade of a makeshift tent, sunglasses on, counting coins or curses, whichever he thought would buy him more respect. You think it's talking to you now, Leela teased. Kareem shrugged. Maybe it is. They worked through the blistering afternoon, their small team chipping away at the dunes with shovels and brushes, carefully brushing aside centuries of silence. Locals had warned them the tomb was cursed. They saw it. Many have refused to help, spitting on the ground and crossing themselves whenever Kareem mentioned Seti-Ra's name. It didn't matter. The map was real, the symbols matched the terrain. The scroll's riddles aligned with the shape of the dunes, the shadows cast by the ancient cliffs at dawn and dusk. But now, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, doubt began to worm into Kareem's chest. What if he was wrong? What if they'd spent weeks baking in the unforgiving desert for nothing? A sudden shout broke the quiet murmur of the dig. Omar came sprinting over, eyes wide, his shovel abandoned in the sand. Come, quickly, I think we found something. He panted. Kareem felt his heartbeat slam in his chest. He grabbed Leela's hand purely for stability, he told himself, and together they stumbled after Omar, sand sliding under their boots. At the excavation pit, they gathered around a half-uncovered stone. Its edges were smooth, its surface inscribed with faint lines that Kareem's mind instantly pieced together into familiar shapes. A jackal, guardian of the dead. Anubis, guide of souls. Leela knelt beside the stone, brushing the sand away with reverent care. Symbols emerged, a row of hieroglyphs that had not seen sunlight for over 3,000 years. Kareem knelt beside her, translating aloud as he traced the characters. He who seeks the truth beneath the sun must bow where the sun bows to stone. He looked up at the setting sun. Its dying light cast a long shadow over the stone, the jackal's snout aligned with the final rays. It's here, Kareem whispered. His fingers trembled as he placed his palm on the stone. It's been here all along. Thomas's voice came from behind them, sharp and skeptical. Are you sure it's not just an old marker for a burial shaft? We can't waste time on another dead lead, Kareem. The investors are already impatient. It's no shaft, Kareem snapped. This is it. Look. He stood, circling the stone until he found what he hoped for, a seam in the sand, faint but definite. He dug at it with his hands until the outline of a stone door emerged, perfectly rectangular, sealed with centuries of sand. Night fell fast in the desert. By the time they had cleared enough to see the steps descending beneath the stone, the sky above was an ocean of stars. They lit lanterns and candles, the flickering light turning the sand into rippling gold. Leela held the lantern high, her face ghostly in its glow. "Do we open it now?" Thomas shifted impatiently, the flame reflecting in his sunglasses. "We open it now." "We've come too far to wait." Kareem hesitated, the old warnings echoing in his mind. He thought of the villagers who had refused to come closer than the distant cliffs, who had crossed themselves and muttered prayers at the mention of Seti-Ra. He placed his hand on the stone door, feeling the rough symbols carved into its surface. His fingertips traced the ancient words, a prayer or a threat? "May the sun guard my rest, may the unworthy feed the darkness." He swallowed hard. "If we open this, there's no going back." Leela looked at him, her eyes steady. "You didn't come here to turn back." Thomas stepped forward, pushing past them. "Then let's get on with it." Together, they wedged crowbars and ropes into the stone seam. Sand poured down like an hourglass as they pried the door loose inch by inch. The grinding sound of stone against stone echoed into the silent desert night, a sound that hadn't been heard by the living for millennia. The door gave way at last with a low, reluctant groan. A rush of stale air escaped from the darkness below, dry, cold, and smelling faintly of spices and death. Kareem peered down the steps. Shadows swallowed the passage after only a few feet. In the lantern light, he could just make out the first steps leading down into the earth, into a darkness that seemed to breathe. They set candles at the threshold, small flickering guardians against the vast dark. Kareem knelt at the entrance, whispering a prayer he barely remembered from his grandmother's stories. Beside him, Leela placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's just a tomb," she said gently. "Stone and sand." Kareem shook his head. "No. It's a story, one that was never meant to be told." He felt the desert wind pick up behind him, swirling sand into the entrance as if trying to seal it again, but the way was open now, somewhere in the dark. He thought he heard a whisper, a voice older than kings, older than the stones themselves. "Where the sun bows to stone, the Pharaoh sleeps." And now, Kareem realized with a chill, they were about to wake him. The first steps into the tomb were taken in near silence, broken only by the muffled crunch of boots on ancient stone and then the occasional drip of water echoing in the passage. Kareem held his lantern high, casting a trembling circle of light that barely pushed back the gloom behind him. Leela murmured translations of the hieroglyphs carved into the narrow walls. Thomas grumbled under his breath, his voice tinged with impatience, while Omar brought up the rear, glancing over his shoulder every few steps as if he expected the desert to follow them inside. The air grew cooler the deeper they went, but it felt thick, pressing against their lungs like wet cloth. The walls were closer now, forcing them to walk single file. Ancient paintings flickered into view in the lantern light, gods with jackal heads, men kneeling in supplication, serpents coiled around eyes that seemed to follow them as they passed. "Look at this," Leela whispered, brushing her fingers lightly over a painted figure of Anubis weighing a heart against a feather. "This is the Book of the Dead ritual, the weighing of the heart." Seti-Ra's tomb must be more than just a burial site. It's a temple to the journey of the soul. Thomas snorted. "Temple or not, all I see is gold waiting to be found." Kareem shot him a look. "It's not about gold, Thomas. We're standing in the middle of history." This is a voice speaking across 3,000 years. Thomas rolled his eyes, letting the beam of his flashlight sweep across the carvings. "Voices don't pay for expeditions. Treasure does." Before Kareem could respond, Omar called out from the back, "Wait, everyone stop." They froze. Omar crouched low, brushing away a thin layer of dust from the stone floor. Beneath it, a faint grid pattern was etched into the rock, a subtle trap, invisible to a careless step. Leela knelt beside him, tracing the lines. "A pressure plate, old as the tomb itself." Thomas swore under his breath, stepping back so abruptly that his boots skidded on the smooth stone. Kareem's heart pounded in his ears. They were lucky Omar had noticed. One careless step, and centuries-old spikes or blade could have turned this passage into their grave. "Careful," Kareem said, his voice steady despite the cold sweat on his neck. We step only where we see the old footprints. Sure enough, faint scuffs, the remnants of the tomb builders or priests who sealed it, guided them in a single file along the narrow safe path. The darkness seemed to crowd in closer, as if the tomb itself wanted them to step wrong. They moved on, deeper. Still, the air smelled of earth and incense long turned to dust. Occasionally, a cold draft whispered past, hinting at chambers yet unopened. After an hour of tense progress, the passage widened abruptly, opening into a small antechamber. For pillars supported the low ceiling, each carved with lines of hieroglyphs that spiraled upward like coiling snakes. On the far wall stood a massive stone door, cracked slightly down the middle, as if the earth itself had tried to pry it open over centuries and failed. Kareem set his lantern down and approached. His fingers brushed over the carved symbols, falcons, sun discs, and beneath them, an inscription in bold, ancient script. Leela stepped beside him, her voice barely a whisper as she read, "He who enters unworthy shall feed the darkness for eternity." Thomas scoffed, "More superstition. It's just meant to scare tomb robbers." Omar crossed himself. "It scares me." Kareem turned to his team, his face solemn in the lantern light. "This is it. Beyond this door is the burial chamber, the final resting place of Pharaoh Seti-Ra." A hush fell over the chamber. Even Thomas seemed to sense it, the air vibrating with an ancient, restless presence. Leela set down her satchel and carefully unrolled the old scroll again. By the flickering candlelight, she compared the symbols with the door's carvings. "It says there's a ritual," she said finally, "a rite of passage for the living. It was performed by the high priests before they sealed the tomb. Do we really believe this?" Thomas snapped. "We've come this far, and now you want to chant prayers instead of opening the door?" "It's not about belief," Kareem said. "It's respect. This tomb is more than a grave. It's a promise, a pact between the Pharaoh and the gods." Thomas threw up his hands. "Fine, do your ritual, but we open the door tonight." Leela began the ritual with quiet reverence. She sprinkled a circle of sand around the stone door and lit for small candles at its corners. She murmured words that had not been spoken aloud for centuries, invocations to Anubis, Osiris, and Ra, asking for safe passage through the realm of the dead. Kareem closed his eyes, letting the low chant wash over him. In his mind's eye, he saw the desert under the moon, dunes shifting like waves, the stars above cold and indifferent. He thought he felt something brush past him, a whisper of silk, the brush of ancient breath. When the final words fell into the silence, Leela stepped back. The candles flickered, casting shifting shadows on the door. "Ready?" Kareem asked. Thomas shoved forward before anyone could answer. Together, they pressed their shoulders against the stone. It groaned, resisting at first, then shifted with a rush of stale air that smelled like cedar resin and old secrets. The door swung inward. Lanterns pushed back the darkness to reveal the burial chamber. It was vast, its walls painted with vivid scenes that seemed to move in the flickering light. The pharaoh on his throne, receiving tribute. Priests performing rituals, serpents coiled around suns, and eyes of Horus stood at the center of it all. On a raised dais lay the sarcophagus. It was massive, carved from black granite and inlaid with gold that gleamed even now, as if it had been polished just yesterday. Its lid was shaped like Seti-Ra himself, serene, eternal, crowned with the double plumes of Upper and Lower Egypt. Kareem felt his knees go weak. He had dreamed of this moment for years. The lost tomb found, the pharaoh waiting for him across the gulf of time. Leela knelt beside the dais, brushing away centuries of dust to read the inscriptions on the base. These glyphs, their prayers for protection and a warning: disturb not the king's rest, lest darkness devour the intruder's soul. Thomas was already circling the chamber, running his gloved hands over the gold statues of gods that flanked the sarcophagus: Horus, Isis, Osiris, Anubis. His eyes glimmered with greed, reflecting the gold. "We're rich," he breathed. "All of us. Do you see this? We could fill a dozen ships with what's in this room." "Be careful," Kareem said sharply. "These aren't coins in a bank vault. This is sacred." Thomas ignored him. He pulled out a small chisel and tapped at the base of a golden statuette. The sound of metal on stone echoed like a gunshot in the tomb's stillness. Leela winced. Thomas, stop! She was cut off by a sudden gust of air. The lantern flames flickered wildly. Somewhere in the darkness, Kareem thought he heard a whisper, not in his mind this time, but in the cold air around them. It sounded like chanting, soft, rhythmic, growing louder. The candles at the four corners of the chamber trembled. One by one, they snuffed out. Thomas looked up, his chisel clattering to the stone floor. What the hell was that? No one answered. They were all staring at the sarcophagus. The shadows around it seemed to ripple, like dark water disturbed by something stirring below. Kareem stepped closer, raising his lantern high. The painted eyes of Seti-Ra gazed back at him, calm and knowing. Leela's voice was a tremor. The scroll said the pharaoh's soul was bound to protect his secrets. It wasn't just a symbol. They really believed he would rise if disturbed. Thomas laughed shakily, but his eyes were wide. Ghost stories. Omar took a step back. Maybe we should go seal it up. Tell the world we found it, but leave it. No, Kareem said, surprising even himself with the firmness in his voice. We didn't come this far to run. He placed a hand on the sarcophagus lid. The stone was cold, far colder than the surrounding air. The chanting grew louder, swirling around them like wind through dry reeds. The paintings on the walls seemed to shimmer in the lantern light, figures of priests and gods flickering as if alive. Kareem looked at his team, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. We open it, together. No one moved for a heartbeat. Then Leela stepped forward, placing her hands beside his. Omar joined, then, reluctantly. Thomas, together. They pushed. The lid shifted with a grinding sigh, releasing a breath of air so ancient it seemed to whisper through their hair. The lantern's flame danced wildly, casting shadows that writhed across the walls. As the lid slid aside, they peered inside, and there he was, Pharaoh Seti-Ra, perfectly preserved in gold and linen, his face serene beneath a crown of lapis and onyx. Jewels glittered on his chest, a serpent circlet coiled around his brow, its emerald eyes glinting with an unnatural spark. Kareem stared down at the ancient king. He felt both wonder and dread crash together in his chest. The chanting stopped. The silence was deafening. Somewhere in the darkness, deep within the tombstone walls, something moved. Kareem swallowed the taste of fear on his tongue. They had come to wake the pharaoh. And now, the pharaoh was listening. The silence after the chanting was so complete that Kareem could hear the faint thud of his own heartbeat. It echoed in his ears like a drum. He stared down at the perfectly preserved face of Pharaoh Seti-Ra. The ancient king's features were serene, his closed eyelids painted with gold leaf that gleamed in the lantern light. Omar crossed himself under his breath, his eyes wide and unblinking. Leela leaned closer, her trembling fingers hovering over the pharaoh's chest. Thomas, breathing hard, let out a shaky laugh that sounded far too loud in the tomb's cold stillness. Thomas whispered. He looks like he could wake up right now. Kareem didn't answer. He felt the same thing, an unsettling sense that the pharaoh was not entirely dead, that the centuries between this moment and the day Seti-Ra was laid to rest had been nothing but a shallow sleep. He forced himself to focus. Take photographs, he said, his voice low. Document everything, don't touch. But Thomas was already leaning over the sarcophagus, his gloved hands darting for the golden amulets that lay across Seti-Ra's chest. He plucked one free, a scarab carved from emerald and obsidian. What did I just say? Kareem snapped. Thomas ignored him, turning the amulet over in his hands. Relax, Professor, we can catalog it later. I'm just securing it for the investors. Put it back, Leela hissed. These objects are part of the pharaoh's burial magic. They're not souvenirs. Thomas rolled his eyes. Magic, you two need to stop reading bedtime stories. A sudden gasp made them all turn. Omar staggered back from the edge of the sarcophagus, clutching his arm. Omar, what is it? Kareem asked. Omar's face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. He held up his sleeve. A small puncture mark oozed a bead of blood. Clinging to the linen was the mangled corpse of a scorpion, its tail still twitching weakly. Gods. Leela whispered, a scorpion, it must have been inside. Thomas backed away. They can't live that long, can they? That's impossible. Omar's breathing grew ragged. Kareem grabbed his shoulder. Omar, look at me, it's small. You'll be fine, we'll get the antivenom. But they all knew how unlikely that was. They were hours from the surface, days from the nearest clinic. The desert had never been forgiving. Omar's knees buckled. Kareem and Leela lowered him to the cold stone floor, propping his head on a satchel. The guide's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, lips moving as if reciting a prayer only he could hear. Leela turned to Kareem, her voice urgent but low. The hieroglyphs say the pharaoh's soul is bound to the tomb's treasures, to guard them from the unworthy. Kareem stared at the gleaming amulet still clutched in Thomas's fist. Put it back now. Thomas hesitated, then tossed it back into the sarcophagus with a clatter. He stepped away, wiping his hands on his trousers as if they'd been dipped in poison. We need to get Omar out, Leela said. He needs help. Kareem nodded. First, we seal the chamber. We can't leave it open. Thomas spat a curse. Seal it. Are you mad? We found the king. Kareem, we can't just close him up again. There's more here. Look at the walls. Look at the passages. He swung his flashlight across the chamber, illuminating a painted mural on the far wall. It showed Seti-Ra standing before a massive black stone, a dark gem held in his hands, radiating streams of hieroglyphs like rays of a dark sun. Leela's breath caught. The Heart of Seti-Ra. Thomas turned to her, eyes glittering with greed again. Heart. What? Heart. It's a legend, Kareem said. A black gemstone. The pharaoh's soul is said to be sealed inside it. Sealed, Thomas repeated, tasting the word like it was honey. And worth how much, do you think? Leela shook her head sharply. It's not for sale, Thomas. If the scroll is right, taking it breaks the seal. It frees whatever is bound. Here, Thomas scoffed. You're both insane. Omar stirred, his voice hoarse. Professor, the passage under what? Kareem bent closer. What passage? Omar lifted a trembling hand, pointing toward the base of the dais. His fingers brushed against a stone panel at the foot of the sarcophagus. Kareem knelt, inspecting it. With Leela's help, he brushed away the centuries of dust and soot, revealing a seam, an outline of a hidden hatch. It's a passage, Kareem breathed. Another chamber. Leela's eyes narrowed. The heart chamber. Thomas was already pushing them aside, dropping to his knees to pry at the panel. The stone scraped free with a hiss of shifting sand, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into pitch darkness. A cold breath of air drifted up, damp and heavy with the scent of old earth and something sour, like rotting incense. Thomas flicked his flashlight down the passage. I'm going. If that gem is real, it's mine. Kareem grabbed his arm. No one goes alone. Thomas pulled free. Try to stop me. He vanished into the stairwell. For a heartbeat, silence returned, broken only by Omar's rasping breath. Kareem turned to Leela. Help me get him up. They lifted Omar, half carrying him toward the exit, but a rumble underfoot made them freeze. The murals on the walls seemed to shimmer, the painted figures almost twitching in the flickering light. A deep, hollow moan echoed up from the hidden passage, like stone grinding on stone, or perhaps something older, something alive. Leela's eyes met Kareem's. It's begun. They laid Omar on a safe ledge outside the chamber. He was drifting in and out of consciousness, whispering fragments of prayers in Arabic, half remembering his mother's voice. Kareem and Leela exchanged a look, no words, only resolve. They grabbed their lanterns and followed Thomas's fading footsteps into the hidden passage. The descent was steep. The air grew colder with every step. The walls here were different, rougher, older, carved in symbols so ancient even Leela's whispered translations stumbled. The same sigils repeated over and over. A black heart, an open eye, coiled serpents. They caught up with Thomas at the base of the steps. He was standing in the threshold of a vast cavern, his flashlight sweeping across something that made Kareem's breath catch in his throat. The heart chamber, massive statues lined the walls, towering figures of Anubis, Thoth, and Horus. They stood frozen in mid-stride, as if waiting for some unspoken command. At the center of the chamber rose a black stone altar, rough and ancient. On it lay a single object, a gemstone the size of a man's fist, jet black yet pulsing faintly. From within, with a dull, red glow, Leela pressed a hand to her mouth. The Heart of Seti-Ra. Thomas's laughter broke the reverence. He stepped forward, boots echoing on the cold stone. It's real. It's all real. Kareem grabbed his shoulder. Don't touch it, for the love of everything, Thomas. Don't, but greed had already drowned out reason. Thomas shoved him away and strode up the steps of the altar. His fingers hovered over the gem, trembling with anticipation. Leela's voice was barely more than a rasp. If he takes it, the Pharaoh's soul is free. Thomas snatched the gemstone from its cradle. The chamber trembled. A low hum filled the air, vibrating in Kareem's bones. The statue's carved eyes flickered with reflected light as if flames danced inside the stone. Thomas turned, the gem clutched to his chest. It's mine. The words died in his throat as the hum rose into a roar. Shadows poured from the corners of the chamber, swirling around him like ink in water. The statues cracked, deep splits running down their length. Sand poured from their wounds like blood. Thomas's scream was swallowed by the roar as the shadows slammed into him, wrapping around his limbs, crawling under his skin. His eyes rolled back, mouth open in a silent howl as the shadows forced themselves inside. Kareem grabbed Leela, pulling her behind one of the massive statues as the wind howled through the chamber, scattering dust and pebbles like shrapnel. When the roar died, all that remained was the flickering sound of their single, guttering lantern dot where Thomas had stood. A figure slowly straightened it wore Thomas's clothes, but its eyes glowed with a cold, unnatural light. Its mouth curled into a smile too wide, too ancient to belong to the man they'd known. In its fist, the heart pulsed like a second heartbeat. Kareem felt Leela's nails dig into his arm. The Pharaoh had awakened. The thing wearing Thomas's body tilted its head, as if testing the limits of the flesh it now inhabited. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim chamber, flickering like embers buried in ash. It flexed its fingers around the pulsing black gemstone, the Heart of Seti-Ra, and a low sound like a laugh crawled out of its throat, but it was a voice layered with echoes, old and dry as desert wind. Kareem felt Leela's breath hitch beside him as they crouched behind the cracked statue of Anubis. The stone felt cold under his palms, grounding him. He tried to steady his pulse. He could still taste sand at the back of his throat. Thomas? Leela whispered, though they both knew the truth. Thomas was gone. The thing heard her. Its glowing eyes slid over the chamber until they fixed on the broken statue they hid behind. It spoke, the voice a twisted mesh of Thomas's accent wrapped around something ancient. The living walk among my shadows, it said, each word scraping the air like stone on stone. My slumber broken, my dominion returns. The statues lining the walls seemed to lean inward in the flickering lantern light, their painted eyes dancing with shadows that didn't belong. The floor beneath them pulsed faintly, as if the whole chamber breathed with the Pharaoh's heartbeat. Kareem leaned closer to Leela, his lips near her ear. When I say run, we move for the stairs. If we can get back to the antechamber, then what? She hissed. Omar's dying, the tomb is waking up. If the legends are true, the whole desert could bury us alive. He had no answer. But standing still wasn't an option. The thing that was once Thomas stepped down from the altar, barefoot on the cold stone. It moved stiffly at first, like a puppet learning its strings, but with each step the movements became smoother. Unnaturally smooth. Regal in a way that made Kareem's skin crawl. It raised its free hand and traced symbols in the air, ancient glyphs that glowed briefly before dissolving like mist. With each gesture, a deep rumble shuddered through the chamber walls. Cracks spread like veins through the painted murals. Dust trickled down in thin streams. Somewhere above, a dull boom echoed through the tomb, like a heartbeat inside stone. Leela clutched Kareem's wrist. If he brings the roof down, "We're dead, not if we break the seal," Kareem whispered. "The scroll said the Pharaoh's soul is bound to the heart, if we can put it back." Leela's eyes darted to the pulsing gemstone in the creature's grip. "You want to get close enough to steal it." Before he could answer, the thing's head snapped in their direction. Its two-eyed smile curled further. "Come forth, children of sand," it crooned. Witness eternity reborn. A roar of grinding stone rose from the far end of the chamber. Two of the towering statues, Thoth and Anubis, shuddered and cracked, their eyes flaring with faint light. With an ear-splitting snap, their stone feet broke free. The statues stepped down from their pedestals, massive limbs moving with grinding grace. Sentinels, guardians, the Pharaoh's eternal servants. Kareem's mind spun as he stared at the impossible. They couldn't fight stone giants. They couldn't even outrun them if the passage was sealed. Now, Kareem hissed. He grabbed Leela's hand. Together they bolted from behind the statue just as Anubis's massive paw crashed down, shattering the spot where they crouched. They sprinted across the vast chamber, lanterns swinging wildly in Kareem's other hand. Shadows and dust churned in their wake. The possessed Pharaoh lifted a single hand. The stone giants pivoted, moving with terrifying, deliberate force. They reached the stairwell just ahead of a stone fist that slammed into the steps, sending chips of ancient rock raining down like hail. Back in the burial chamber, Omar stirred weakly where they'd left him on the days. His eyes fluttered open as Kareem and Leela burst in, gasping for breath. "Omar, stay awake," Kareem shouted, but Omar barely managed a thin smile. "Professor, you found him." "Yes, and we're leaving," Kareem said. "We have to close the passage." "Leela, the scroll, the ritual." She rummaged through her satchel with trembling hands. The scroll's brittle papyrus crackled as she unrolled it on the cold stone. Kareem dropped beside her, reading the faded lines by flickering lantern light. "To seal the soul, the heart must return to its cradle. The words must be spoken by the living. The offering must be made in blood." Kareem's eyes flicked to Omar, pale, dying. Leela's voice broke. "No, he's already dying," Kareem whispered. He wouldn't, but Omar's eyes fluttered open again, locking on Kareem's. Somehow, he had heard. He smiled weakly. "For Egypt, for my family." He rasped. He lifted his arm, the one already swollen from the scorpion's poison, and placed Kareem's hand over his wrist. The chamber shook as the Pharaoh's sentinels neared the passage. Their massive footfalls cracked the stone floor. The possessed Pharaoh's voice drifted through the darkness, chanting in a tongue older than the tomb. Leela squeezed Omar's other hand, tears slipping down her dusty cheeks. Kareem raised his knife, hesitated, then pressed the blade to Omar's wrist. Blood welled up, warm and dark, soaking the ancient scroll. Omar's final breath was a whisper, "May the gods protect you." His eyes closed, still and peaceful at last. The chamber trembled violently now, dust and sand cascading from the ceiling. Leela chanted the sealing words from the scroll, her voice steady despite the tears. Kareem grasped Omar's wrist and smeared the blood across the floor in a circle around the hidden passage. The air inside the tomb shifted, growing heavier, charged with an unseen force. A roar of fury echoed up the passage. The Pharaoh had felt it. The heart was calling to be returned. The first statue forced its way into the burial chamber. Anubis's stone muzzle twisted into a growl as it stepped over the dais, crushing ancient offerings underfoot. Behind it, the other sentinel lumbered closer, cracking pillars as it moved. Kareem turned to Leela. "The heart. We have to get it back on the altar." Leela wiped her tears away with the back of her dusty hand. "How?" Kareem drew a deep breath. "I'll distract them. You get behind him, grab the heart and run. Put it back where it belongs. You won't make it." Kareem looked at her, really looked, and managed a small, sad smile. "Promise me you will." Leela's lip trembled, but she nodded. "I promise." They crept back into the heart chamber together, moving like shadows. The possessed Pharaoh stood before the altar, the gemstone pulsing in his hand, chanting in a voice that made the walls vibrate. The guardians flanked him, huge and terrible in the swirling dust. Kareem caught Leela's eye one last time. Then he stepped into the open. Seti-Ra. He shouted. The Pharaoh turned, Thomas's dead eyes burning like coals. The guardians twisted toward Kareem, stone arms raised to crush him. Kareem drew the old bronze knife from his belt, laughably small against giants of stone, but he held it high. For Egypt. He roared. He ran straight at the Pharaoh, shouting, drawing every ounce of rage and desperation to the surface. The possessed king raised a hand. The guardians lunged. Behind him, Leela slipped through the shadows, darting up the side of the altar steps. Her fingers brushed the heart just as Kareem crashed into Seti-Ra, slamming his knife into the king's shoulder. Stone fists smashed down. Kareem felt ribs shatter, heard his own breath tear from his lungs. Pain flared white, then faded into warmth. He saw Leela, silhouetted in the dust and flickering lamplight, raising the heart high. She placed it back on the cradle of the altar, just as Kareem's eyes closed for the last time. The moment the gemstone touched the stone, a blinding light flared. The guardians froze mid-strike. The possessed Pharaoh screamed, a sound that echoed like a desert wind tearing through tombs. Shadows poured from Thomas's mouth and eyes, swirling back into the heart. A thunderous crack split the ceiling. Dust and sand poured down, burying the altar in shifting dunes. The statues collapsed like puppets with cut strings, crashing to the floor in splintering ruin. Leela stumbled back, half blinded by tears and dust. She found Kareem's body, still broken, but his face at peace. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering a promise to tell the story to the world, even if no one would believe it. Above, dawn's light finally pierced through cracks in the ancient ceiling. Dust and sand churned through the ancient tomb, swirling in ghostly currents as the echoes of Seti-Ra's final scream faded into silence. In the heart chamber, the stone guardians lay shattered, broken statues once more, inert, hollow husks, robbed of their ancient spark. The black gemstone, the heart, lay cradled on the cracked altar, its dull glow now just a flicker, like the last ember of a dying fire. Leela knelt beside Kareem's still body. She brushed the sand from his closed eyes, her trembling fingers smoothing the desert grit from his hair. His face, even in death, carried a hint of peace, a man who had walked willingly into darkness to keep it from swallowing the world. Above, the tomb groaned as if exhaling its final breath. Pebbles and grit pattered down from the cracked ceiling. The muraled walls flickered in her lantern's dim glow, their painted gods frozen in scenes of judgment, war, and rebirth. Leela drew a shaking breath and rose to her feet. She was alone now, alone except for the tomb's whisper and the slumped figure of Thomas, what was left of him, lying sprawled on the steps of the altar. His empty eyes stared at the ceiling, the puppet strings of the Pharaoh's curse severed. At last, she glanced back at the heart, a chunk of polished void pulsing faintly in the cradle where she'd forced it to rest. Her mind spun. Could she really leave it here? Every instinct screamed at her to bury it forever, to collapse the passage and seal the Pharaoh's curse in stone, but a colder thought struck her. If someone else found this tomb, if greed ever led another Thomas down these steps. No, she couldn't risk it. She snatched Kareem's lantern and lifted the heart in her free hand. It felt heavier than before, as if it had fed on every life it had touched. She tucked it carefully into the folds of her satchel, wincing at its icy chill. She whispered into the darkness, half prayer, half vow, "You sleep now, and this time, you'll sleep forever." Then she turned her back on the Pharaoh's tomb. The passage out felt longer than the way in, every step echoing with the ghosts of the dead. She found Omar's lifeless body by the sealed burial chamber, his face calm. She paused, placing her hand on his brow in farewell, a promise to tell his family how brave he had been. The winding tunnel led her up the narrow steps, the lantern flickering lower and lower as the oil burned away. The stale air tasted of ancient incense and dust, the last breath of a kingdom buried by time. Finally, she reached the broken stone door, half buried again under the shifting desert sand. Dawn's first light streamed through the gap, a thin blade of gold cutting through centuries of darkness. Leela dragged herself out into the desert dawn. Outside, the desert sprawled endless and indifferent. The dunes shifted under the rising sun. The tents of their camp flapped lazily in the morning breeze. Beyond them, the horizon shimmered, endless sand waiting to swallow secrets whole. She stumbled into the camp, her boots leaving ragged trails in the sand. Empty bedrolls, scattered tools, Kareem's journal half buried near the flap of his tent, memories of the dream that had brought them here, now all ghosts drifting away on the wind. Leela collapsed onto a crate, the satchel with the heart pressed tight to her chest. She looked back once at the dunes already sliding to reclaim the tomb's entrance. It would vanish again, as it always did. The desert kept its secrets well. When the sun climbed higher, Leela forced herself to her feet. She packed what little she could carry: Kareem's notes, the scroll, Omar's journal. She set the rest aflame, fuel cans doused over tents and crates. The fire rose quickly, snapping and crackling as ancient paper turned to ash. If the world wanted to dig for the Pharaoh's secrets again, they'd have to start from nothing. She would not leave breadcrumbs for grave robbers and fools. As the last flames died, she turned away from the smoke, clutching the satchel tight. Hours later, she trudged across the shifting dunes alone, boots sinking deep in scorching sand. In her mind, she heard Kareem's voice reading the scroll's final lines: "Where the sun bows to stone, the Pharaoh sleeps." And now he slept again, deeper than before. 3 days later, a small caravan found her near the edge of the desert, sunburned, half delirious but alive. She told them only what they needed to hear: that her team was lost in a collapsed ruin, that she alone survived to carry home the story. When they asked about the satchel, she lied. It was nothing, she said. Old maps, worthless relics, no gold, no treasure. She let them believe she was mad from the sun. It was better that way. Weeks passed, the world spun on. Reporters clamored for answers: a missing team, rumors of a lost Pharaoh's tomb found and lost again. Leela said little, refusing interviews, burying her truth in layers of scholarly caution and carefully redacted reports. In private, she stared at the heart every night, a cold, black star locked in a vault beneath her floorboards. It pulsed, sometimes faintly, as if dreaming. She never touched it barehanded. She surrounded it with salt and sacred symbols, a fragile fortress of faith and fear. She thought often of Kareem's final breath, Omar's whispered prayer, Thomas's empty eyes. She wondered if the Pharaoh's curse would ever truly sleep. One night, a storm swept through her small house, desert winds lashing at the shutters, thunder rolling like distant drums of war. She woke to find sand scattered across her floor, carried on the wind despite locked doors and shuttered windows. The heart sat in its vault, cold and dark. Yet when she leaned closer, she thought she heard it, a faint whisper, dry as old parchment: "Where the sun bows to stone, the Pharaoh sleeps." She slammed the vault shut and backed away, heart pounding. She forced herself to remember Kareem's last words to her, the promise to protect the truth at all cost. Some secrets must remain buried, some kings must never wake again.